We need to become better and more critical consumers of data, not just that we consume that other people are putting in front of us, but we need to be better critics of the data we're putting in front of our stakeholders, trying to show the efficacy of the work we're doing.
Bonnie, in her words, a data geek at heart, holds a PhD in human capital management, a master's in business administration, and a bachelor's in marketing. Thank you, Bonnie, for joining us. We're excited to get in here today about data, fact, or fiction. And from our previous conversations, I think it's going to be good and insightful. We've got Therese Longo is also here with us. She'll be kind of moderating some of the stuff. She's from Radcom and is the Vice President of Operations at Radcom, and is going to help us out today with some of the moderation of chat and questions and things like that. So let's jump in. Bonnie, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Matt, and good morning to everybody. I was delighted to be chatting earlier with Matt and Teresa and Gina about the data side of performance, because a lot of us are in the performance improvement business, and really the way we get to know if our things are working is to measure them. And throughout the past 20 years or so, where I've really been working with organizations on just that, how do we measure the impact? One thing that's become apparent is that we really need to become better citizen data scientists, if you will. We need to become better and more critical consumers of data, not just that we consume that other people are putting in front of us, but we need to be better critics of the data we're putting in front of our stakeholders, trying to show the efficacy of the work we're doing. So that's what today's session is about, is just to kind of get us thinking about making sure that we're digging deep enough in the data that we can defend it. I'm just going to start with a simple survey, get you all nimble and working here. And we've got a poll question here. Very simple. What is your favorite color? This is one of those, this is a survey question, not a test question. So there's no right or wrong answer. Let's move on, because this was just a little bit of fun here. Let us presume that we have now a total population of 14, because that's what I see for the number of participants. That's everybody. Our survey only has 3 people, though. So the question is going to be, do those 3 people represent the 14? Well, let's take a look at what starts happening when we ask this kind of question. Because we've got 30%, or 33 for blue, green, and purple. Well, another survey was done that asked, let me just share those results. You can all see that. So this is a survey that's also been done. And you can see the results there. It is not 33. In fact, it's 42 for blue, 25 for red, and 12 for purple. So we wonder, is our group unique? Or is this other group unique? What's going on? Well, it turns out that this survey was just men. Guess what happens when you add women? Women have different preferences. And it turns out that this survey was conducted by a graduate student at a university who needed what they call a convenience sample. So he simply surveyed people at the university that were students, faculty, and staff. So that's in one small enclave in one particular country, in one particular state, in one particular city, at one particular university. So is this indicative of the world? In fact, if you ask the same question in Japan, you'll see a greater predominance of red than you see in this university. The whole point here is we are often presented with data. And I love to think of the USA Today, that infographic that when we used to do a lot of traveling, you probably all saw the graphics. They had an infographic giving you some fun factoid. And I was always wondering, who did they survey for that? Because if they had asked our group, what's your favorite color? It would have come up a third. But if they'd asked another group, it would have come up something different. So when we're looking at data, we've got to think about who's included in the data. And this is just the beginnings of kind of becoming a critical consumer of data. And that's what we're here today to talk about, is to become better consumers. We're going to do this in the lens of learning and performance improvement. And we're going to look at some of the limitations of typical reporting that we see today. We're going to look at other factors that might be influencing performance that we need to consider when we're analyzing our data. And you'll clearly see how if you don't include those factors like male versus female or US versus Japan, you could draw some very inaccurate conclusions. This session really is about being curious. So we want you to just be curious, and that's we're trying to exercise that bone today. We're going to focus by looking at a few things in our performance improvement in our workplace that can influence the effectiveness of any of our training interventions. What else could be affecting the outcomes? We're going to look at something called selection bias. And in a minute, you'll know exactly what that is. You probably already do, but we'll make it very clear. We're going to look at demographic factors. We saw that with the gender and with the region on the survey example. Also, things that are happening within an organization and time-related events. That if we ignore these things and we go and trumpet our results to the world, we could look foolish because we haven't considered these other factors. And our data might look good on the surface, but it can quickly be our downfall if somebody starts questioning us if we have not considered these other things. So let's take a look at this selection bias. We've got a sales training program, and we're looking at the sales afterwards, and we're saying, yes, look how good that is. The trained people are selling 83. They're outselling those untrained people by 23 units. I love this course. Let's submit it for a Brandon Hall Award. This is the best thing. We got to get everybody through this, and we got to tell everybody how great this is. Well, there's something that we're missing here. And it's the concept of prior performance, meaning how did these people perform before? And who got selected for the training? So if we look at this graph in the upper right, you can see that the people who went through training already outsold the people who didn't go. Let's take our high performers and let's give them the motivation and give them the recognition by putting them through training. Have you ever seen that? Where perhaps an organization handpicks who gets to go to training, or who gets to go to a pilot, or who gets training first, or who gets to go to the fancy events, or that sort of thing. Let's pick our high performers. I see it all the time. And what we end up with then is, yeah, they improved. Well, they improved 3 units, but the untrained people improved 20 units. Do we think it could have possibly been the training then? The people who went through the training improved only 3. The people who got no training improved 20. If we were to just present these final results, we would be foolish if somebody discovered this. So this is saying, whoa, the training probably didn't work. There's something else going on out there. Maybe we had a new product launch and the untrained people got more of the new products. Who knows? But scenario B, on the other hand, if we could tell this story where the untrained people actually were higher performers, the trained people were lower, and they improved. They more than doubled their sales. So this thing with prior performance gets right into selection bias. If who is selected, who is in your population? Did we only survey men for the color survey? Did we only measure trained people? Did we only send high performers to training? So the best way to overcome that in any results reporting is to look at prior performance. Ideally, your 2 groups would have the same level of prior performance. So then you could say, well, everybody was the same, and now the trained people improved. But scenario B gets us a much closer look at perhaps the efficacy of the training than scenario A. Any comments or questions on this? Have you dealt with selection bias and working with prior performance before? Okay, we'll take a look now at number 2, the demographics. We're going to go through these 4 types of variables, and then you'll be in breakout sessions where you're going to get to play detective and get curious about the data. So when we talk about demographics, there are a couple types of demographics. We have those that are more at an organizational level. What region, what country, what's the size of the team, what division are you in, manufacturing or sales or customer support or engineering, that sort of thing, because results could vary that way. And then there are also some individual factors that are just specific to the individual. So if I were presenting data on blocked shots in basketball, who has stopped the ball from going in the hoop, chances are this tall guy, Manute Bol, has a lot higher number of blocked shots than Muggsy Bogues simply because he's 2 feet taller. So that would be a personal demographic difference. The height. In basketball, height matters. In much of our work, it probably doesn't. But maybe education or tenure might have some bearing. So I want to look at those sorts of things where applicable. And let's take a look at how that might play out in an organization that has a rewards and recognition program. They got the results of their employee engagement survey and felt that it looked like employees felt underappreciated. So they put a program in place, allowing colleagues and team members to recognize each other for going above and beyond. And the rewards were not monetary. It was more recognition, more symbolic, much more intrinsic. But it was really just as, hey, we see you. Thanks for doing a great job. Attaboy, attagirl kind of thing. Did it work? Well, they looked at their engagement scores before and after. Same scores. So if that's all you presented, what decisions might you make about this recognition program? You might conclude, maybe that didn't work. Let's try something else. How many times do we see organizations do a quick study, look at the results like this, and then say, well, that didn't work, let's try something else. And you get the flavor of the month, program du jour kind of thing, and they never figure out what worked, what didn't work, and so on. Well, if they had taken a deeper dive into their engagement results, they would have seen something like this. They segmented it by age, an individual factor. And they would have seen that the people under 30 saw a spike in their engagement, and the people over 50 saw a decrease in engagement. So imagine, and you don't have enough information from the case study, but I'm just going to make it up right here. Imagine that the recognition was a badge and that you could put the badge in your signature block. You might have discovered that people under 30 like badges better than people over 50. And maybe the badge as the recognition thing didn't resonate with everybody in the company. So that might be insight into you to change what the program is doing, because in fact, it seems like it might have worked. Maybe something else was going on though, but something's happening. If we look at it by department, now we're seeing different things. We're seeing that the people in customer service are increasing in engagement, but sales department is decreasing. So this might make you think, I wonder if more of our younger people are in customer service. And if that's the case, you might want to cross-tab the data and dig in, and you might find that this badging program worked just fine for them. What do we know about salespeople and motivation and incentives? If any of you have ever worked with salespeople, or if you're a salesperson yourself, that audience tends to be more money motivated. Yes. Yes. More money. Do they care about a badge? No, they'd probably rather get a spiff, some sort of financial thing. So they might have thought that this program was not relevant to them. In fact, it might have made them feel like their contribution was diminished, and so their engagement went down. We don't necessarily know, but when we dig deeper, Now we can start to ask the questions. Well, did it really work? And if it did work, maybe we want to go do some qualitative digging and find out why and why not. But we need to get deeper than the 75 before and 75 after. This is a term called segmenting your data, segmentation, when you take your general results and start slicing and dicing them up by all these different factors. And it's very insightful. The third type of factor we want to look at are these organizational things, because stuff happens in a company. You might have a work-life balance, or the organizational commitment that people feel, or your manager's support, or do you trust leaders? And these are what we call latent variables, because they generally are not sitting in some database somewhere. Your tenure will be there, your department, maybe your age will be in your HRIS, but you're not going to have things like this. So to get some of this, we might need to do a survey. And here's a particular survey that happened. This organization, this was in the beginnings of the pandemic. They had a manufacturing facility, and they converted part of their facility to making masks so they could get people back to work. And they trained everybody on the mask making process, and they expected about a 3% reject rate. So they trained everybody. There was no before performance because they hadn't made masks before. So we didn't have what they did before. Everybody was nothing before. And how are they doing after training? And what they found is the morning shift or the day shift had a 5% reject rate, and the PM shift had a 12% reject rate. Might management take action right here? Yeah, they might. They might say, gosh, what's going on in that night shift? Doggone it. But they wanted to know, well, what is the difference? They all got the same training. What's going on? So they sent out a survey and asked about the level of manager support. How much did managers believe in the process? How well were managers trained? How did they help you? And so on. And what you see here is the areas with low manager support, low supervisory support, had 10 to 20% reject rates. Regardless of shift, areas that had high manager support only had a 1% reject rate. How often do we think we need to train the worker when really it might be the manager we need to train? This kind of analysis, when you ask about the level of manager support, gets at another variable of how much support the manager is providing, and is that the factor? Maybe we're training the wrong people. And there's the fourth one I wanted to talk about before we get into our breakout sessions, and that's time-related events. We've got major events that can be happening in a company. You could have a merger or a new product launch, or seasonality. We know there are such things as seasonality in different kinds of industries, maybe healthcare, you've got flu season, and so on. Some of the major events that you might see, new product launch, end of the fiscal year. Organizations do interesting things at the end of the fiscal year that could affect their metrics. So if you're pulling data, you want to be careful that you're not getting the big hump or something, that the big bump of everybody booking their business the last week of the year. Or mergers. Now, one of my favorites is like when bonuses are paid, because if you're in an organization with bonuses, those organizations tend to have higher turnover the month after bonuses are paid. People stick around to get the bonus, and if they had the intention of leaving, they'll get the bonus and then they'll leave. So if you're looking at turnover as one of your metrics, be careful to be sensitive around bonus season when you're measuring turnover. So those are the four that are kind of the big ones, the whole selection bias and the prior performance, and that's one, and then the demographics, the time-related events, and things happening in the organization. And when you can segment your data by these sorts of things, you can uncover new stories and get a better idea of what's really going on, and not make claims about results that might be shot down under tighter scrutiny. So now we're going to send you into breakout sessions, and there are going to be 3 mini scenarios. And Teresa's going to put a link in the chat for the PDF that will have these scenarios. And we ask that you all try to download that now, so you'll be sure to have somebody in your room that has the scenarios. And we're going to give you 15 minutes to dig through those, about 5 minutes on each, and then we'll come back together and have a quick debrief and then wrap us up. We had those 3 scenarios, and we're going to quickly just chat about those, where we had this customer satisfaction one where we had before and after, so that's good. We had prior performance and post performance of 85 to 89. I could say, yay, our program worked. In your discussions, what did you come up with? What do you think happened with customer satisfaction training here? Let's just be open mic here.
So one of the things that we talked about is by the different regions, there could have been anything from, maybe there was a hurricane in the Southwest. And so people who were calling in from the Southwest were not feeling very generous anyway.
Oh, yeah, there could have been something else happening.
We don't know that. So it's an area to potentially dig into.
What was different in the Southwest? Yeah.
So we decided that the billing department was in the Southwest.
Okay, you might want to cross tab these, right, and see where the hotlines were. If you think about hotline training or customer satisfaction training, and this was a one size fits all, was that appropriate? Do you have, if you're doing end user support versus billing, do you think that the nature of the caller is different? Kate, you're nodding.
Yeah, they're gonna, if you're talking to people who have billing issues, they're already frustrated, and it's about money, and they probably don't want to pay it. You probably need some specialized skills to deal with that.
Yeah. So it could be that training just wasn't, one size fits all. We might have been lazy. Oh yeah, we have call centers. Let's do training. Another question that sometimes comes up as we look at the graph on the left is, why in the world did we waste the time of the Northwest people putting them through training? Why didn't we study them for best practices instead?
That's a good point.
Because if the organization had looked at prior performance before doing the training, they might not have invited Northwest, or they might have studied Northwest, and even Central, because Central is about 94%.
Mm-hmm.
So how much time do organizations waste training people who don't need it? This could lead to some really interesting discussions and some refinements of the programming.
Mm-hmm.
Our next one then was, any other comments about the call center?
Actually, the only idea I had was, why not, you talked about studying the Northwest and Central for best practices, but why not also bring some of those people in on maybe beta testing the training or having a say in the training, because they're the ones who are successful with it in the first place. They can help their colleagues in other regions, so it's peer-to-peer. And I think that would be, I think there'd be a value add there of being peer trained.
Yeah, lot of credibility there. Matt asked the question while you all were in your breakout sessions. We were chatting, and he said, how many organizations do you think segment the data and look at it like this before the training? Because if they hadn't, they wouldn't know that Northwest was better. But chances, they might have been reporting it. But anyway, sometimes you want to look before as part of your needs analysis before you go build the training. All right, let's take a look at some widgets. We had some widget salespeople. And here we got to look at, they did split it for the trained and the untrained, and looked at it longitudinally so we can see over time how they did before and after the training. What kind of aha moments did you have here? And what other questions might you have? Other questions might that have triggered?
My big question was, if the trained were doing that much better, and it's only a third of the company. Why in the world was there only the one sales training session?
Okay, we got a couple of things going on, Kate, with that one. Exactly. First, selection bias, right? They picked the higher performers. Now, maybe this was a pilot, or maybe they only had a certain budget. They allocated so much money per year for training, maybe. And we'll pick our high performers because we know they're going to stick with us. All these reasons that they might have gotten picked. But those would be questions to ask, absolutely. Any other observations about what happened here? Would you say the training worked?
Yeah.
Well-
You might. Because you see that after the training, we had the training here in Q4, and the trained people did get bigger bumps while the untrained stayed kind of flat. They stayed, they went up a little bit, but these guys went up a lot more. Then probably something in the industry or in the market happened. COVID hit, recession hit, election season, who knows, something happened. And sales tanked, product recall, Elon Musk, But what we see here is everybody declined, but the high performers declined less. We call that mitigation. The training mitigated the negative impact of the economic issue that was pervasive. So just what you look at is the delta. How much of a change, let's say from Q1, let's say this was 5 and that's 10, they went up to 5, they went up about 8 points, and these guys went up about 3. Well, percentage wise, these guys, the green guys, the trained guys, did do better after training. It seems that the training worked, and they took an initial dive, but then they stabilized. So maybe that was darn good training because it made them resilient, made them creative, made them dig deep into existing customer relationships, whatever the training was about. But an interesting point, Kate, that why'd you train the high performers? And why, if it did work, doggone, when you got this downturn, why don't you run another cohort right here? Get those other people selling. So good ideas. Okay, now we had some real estate sales. And this is kind of all over the board because sometimes training has a long-term effect and sometimes training has a short-term effect. What do you think is going on here?
So,
did the training work? Would you want to go tell the boss this was great training, we should run it again? No. Barbara, Kate, you're shaking your heads.
no, I'm not ready to say anything.
I'm going to help you say something. This kind of gets into data visualization. I know you've heard the term. How do you visualize your data? Here we're looking at it longitudinally over 24 months. But we think, I wonder if real estate is cyclical. Real estate is very cyclical. Has to do with families wanting to get set before the school year and when they are open to buying houses and that sort of thing. So it may look like the training gave you a bump, the initial one. It looked like, hey, training might have helped. You could have naively made this assumption. Boy, training helped. We need to do training every 4 months because these real estate agents need a little jolt in the arm of some joy juice, some motivational juice to sell. Because look, if they had a downturn in August, if we could train them in August, they'd bump back up because they had a downturn in February, they bumped up. But when we look at it, it's just the pattern. So the training was probably pointless. Any other observations on this one? Okay. I've got a real quick one. Yep, Kate, it always dips in August. It does. I've got a case study I wanted to share with you very quickly. And this is real data from a real organization. And they wanted to know how their learners, they did an annual learner survey to find out how their learners valued the training and the training services they were providing. And I'm imagining you're familiar with the Net Promoter Score. I'm not going to get into the details, but consider it like a satisfaction score. And 50 is actually quite good. In fact, on a Net Promoter Score, Harvard, I think, is 51 and Wharton is 41, or it's vice versa. So those are benchmark scores there. So they were excited with 50, but they said, well, how does that compare to corporate universities, not higher education? It turns out that Degreed had done a survey. And in the Degreed survey, people were rating their organizations to a -30. That means there are more detractors than promoters about their corporate training. This company wanted to know, are we that good? Wow, are we that special? So we started looking at it, slicing it, segmenting it by some of those demographic things. What about size of the organization? This was a very large organization with a very large training budget. Degreed happened to tell us in the little footnotes of their survey the size of the companies that responded to the survey. Now, if you've worked at large organizations and if you've worked at small organizations, or even just intuiting, which would have the bigger budget, which might have more fancy training, which might have higher quality video, simulation, live training, workshops, ride and drive events? Who's going to have that? Probably your bigger organizations, right? So you right there, this organization said, oh, we might have a bigger budget. They might have Lectora page turns. We've got AR, VR, and simulations. Maybe that makes a difference. We had one other bit of data on the on both surveys, and that was the age of the respondents. And this big company has an older workforce. 60% of the survey respondents were over 50. So an aging workforce that loves the training. The Degreed survey had 1% of the respondents over 50. Might people that are 35 and under view the exact same training differently than people who are 60? Yeah. So this organization said, oh, well, maybe they like it because they're old, they don't know any better. They're just happy to have some training because they're used to not having anything, and they'll settle for anything. And to them, a drag and drop is high energy interactivity. While you get the under 30s who are expecting Second Life kinds of stuff and Dungeons and Dragons and all kinds of cool stuff. So the organization said, well, let's split our data by population and see. So they did this on their own data. Remember, they had an overall 50. Well, there are people over 50. Yeah, they loved it. 62. Gave it a great rating. People 35 to 50. So then they said, wow, while under 35 is a smaller piece of our workforce today, it's going to be a bigger piece of our workforce tomorrow. And if they're not eating what we're putting down, we might need to start adjusting as our workforce morphs. We might have to look at more modern learning approaches. So this was very helpful for them to really dig in and see how different audiences felt about their training, just on simple level 1 kind of stuff. So what we learned today is there are things that affect our data. And we looked at 4 different variables, 4 different categories of variables. And when we segment the data, we can become better and more critical consumers. And we'll uncover new insights. It raises a lot more questions for further investigation, as you guys saw, but it helps us make our next investment smarter. And it also helps us be more critical, because the next time somebody puts a graph in front of you, you're probably going to start wondering, well, who did they survey? Or I wonder if that differs by department or age. Or I wonder if the manager's support has anything to do with that. you probably just after 1 hour are now going to be more critical consumers of data. And this will enhance your storytelling, because when you can segment the data, you can now tell stories a lot better. And you can go to people who have the stories, who did see the increase, and tell those stories. So our goal today was really to make you better consumers of data. And it's really just stay curious. When somebody presents data, be curious. Love the data, but don't take it at face value. And with that,
Thank
Matt,
you.
I'm going to turn it back over to you for any questions that we might have coming in and wrapping up.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And, one of the things, I'm going to take the mic for just a second, because I think it was what I saw some faces responding, and I do want to open it up. So if you guys have questions, let's throw them in the chat. That would be great. The one question I had was, one of the things that kind of got what I saw some nods and faces and agreement was whenever you talked about, training the right people, and whenever there's management, maybe it was I didn't have enough support from my managers. What are some of the thoughts, suggestions that maybe you have related to how do you address that with a company that's a difficult, if they don't want to hear it, how do you go through bringing that up and addressing it?
I'll give you an example, Matt, because a case study is always helpful. This was a large utility company, and they were investing in a 3-tier leadership development program, which a lot of organizations are. And they had an entry-level, first-level supervisor program. And we did an analysis. They wanted to know if it was working. They piloted it. It was a year-long program with 15 different modules, and 3 of them brought people together. I mean, it was expensive, and it was robust. And they had high hopes. They wanted to know if it was working. So we built out what we call a measurement map to look at some quantitative evidence as well as some qualitative to see if it was working. And even with all our segmentation, we could not find anything in the data that showed it was working. But we heard anecdotally that it was. So we interviewed students who, both those who said it, who had stories about what they were doing afterwards, and those that didn't. And doggone if they didn't say, it was so cool because my manager encouraged me to go and didn't bug me at all while I was in training. And then afterwards gave me opportunities to lead and this sort of thing. So we said, let's do a survey of all the participants. And so we did, and we asked about the manager's support before, during, and after. And we got stories on all ends of the spectrum. My manager made me feel guilty before I even went. My manager texted me during the workshop, even though they were supposed to let us be, and kept sending me things. And then when I got back, they just made me feel more guilty. And I tried to share things and nobody would listen, and versus the other guy. So we resegmented all the data by level of manager support. And it was totally manager support. When we had the people that had manager support, their results went off the charts. The people with saw really nothing. The people with low manager support, their results actually went down. Because they had been held up as, you're a future leader of the company. Not really. So what did the organization do? They said, oh my gosh, we're investing all this money. They had rolled this program out before they'd rolled out the mid-level manager program, because they had more of these people. So they quickly implemented a manager support workshop to tell the managers of these first level leaders what the program was about, what the expectations were of them. And the manager had to go through that before their people could get in for the next cohort. So they actually, you might not see that in all organizations. Some might just, never mind, I don't care. Train, I got the training box checked. But if they care, it's hard to ignore that data.
Thank you.
And it became quantitative data with rich stories behind it to make that case.
We do have another question in the chat. Ginny asked, is there one type of fiction that you see most often?
I think it's just a general failure to segment, or and perhaps the one of the best things is prior performance. And sometimes people think you have to collect baseline data ahead of time before you can get prior performance. But if you're talking business outcomes, outputs of people, sales or call volumes or claims processing, whatever they might be doing, that data is in a system. You can go back years and get historical data. I guess the sad thing is not looking at your performance data before you invite people to your events. But always, because that is the best way to show cause and effect, is if you've got trained and untrained people and you've got their before and after performance. And you can, if you've got enough people, you can segment your trained and untrained by prior performance level. So let's, just as an example, let's say sales, and let's say 0 to 10 is low, 10 to 20 is medium, and 20 and above is high. And you've got your trained and untrained. You group them into those buckets. Now you've got 6 buckets. You've got trained, low performers who got trained, average performers who got trained, high performers who got trained, and the same for the untrained. Then you compare those sub buckets, low performer untrained versus low performer trained. Now you're starting to tell the story.
That's good.
So using performance as a segmentation variable is great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bonnie. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're just a minute after 1 here, but thanks for everybody sticking around. Hopefully you're walking away with a different outlook on data. And as Bonnie said, you might read that USA Today poll with a little bit of questioning or skepticism, maybe, as you look at that, just to dig a little bit deeper. But thank you very much.